Hello there, Madison High School students, and welcome to week 3 of our lovely American Literature course. So this week we'll have lots of different varieties of pieces for you to read and get acclimated to. So I do thoroughly encourage you to watch these every week. I'm going to do a little lecture here on this period since we're doing realism and naturalism. So a couple things to keep in mind. Everything that was turned in on time has been graded, so just make sure you review your grades. Again, I do apologize for the grade book snafu last week. Miscalculations. It was unfortunately calculating things that hadn't been graded yet as zeros. So I fixed it. Please let me know in the future if anything like that pops up. I am human, so sometimes I mess up just like all of us. And I appreciate your patience. And yeah, I sent you all a little disclaimer on my AI policy. I did see some indicators of AI use in some of the forum posts and reading responses last week. And so this is more of like a little, hey, I want you to know that I do see AI and like I do acknowledge when AI is being used. Um, I'm going to let everybody have the opportunity now to use the infographic I sent you to make sure that you're using AI as a support tool and not as a thinking tool. If I see too much AI use, I will ask you to redo the assignment or not get a grade on the assignment because it does violate the AB Tech Code of Conduct. So please make sure that when you are using things like ChatGPT, Magic School, Meta AI, or any of those programs that you are making sure that it is helping you to support your thinking as opposed to doing the thinking for you. Um, and on that note, let's get started. Okay, so this week in your Norton, hopefully you should have all of these selections. These are all fairly short readings. The longest thing is probably going to be the overview that I'm going to do here in this lecture. So a lot of the pieces that you're going to see this week are coming from a period I'm going to introduce you to, the realism and naturalism period. And so it comes a little bit after Reconstruction and before the Progressive era. It kind of nestles right in that little spot. I'm going to spend a little bit of time on the Reconstruction era. It's around the same time here, and we can kind of like see the differences. So as we're going through, here are the things that you're going to be reading. So you've got your reading selections here. Okay. They're all fairly short, like 2 pages, 3 pages. So even though there's like a lot of selections, I want you to know like they're all very, very short pieces to read. I would spend like the first day of the week today just starting to read the pieces before you start responding to anything. And so you're going to read some Kate Chopin, Emma Lazarus, Toni Morrison, and her intro to Huck Finn. And I'm going to talk to you about some of the perceptions of Huck Finn and racist language. Edith Wharton, Roman Fever. Mark Twain, The Notorious Jumping Frog of Calaveras County. And then the intro to Huck Finn. And then War Prayer by Mark Twain. So the only tasks for the week, you're going to have a reading reflection on satire and Twain. So as you're reading Twain, be paying attention to satirical language. And then the writing workshop is going to be recreating Hannibal, Missouri, which is from Calaveras County. And then Women in Realism is your forum post. So we're doing kind of like a little smattering of everything this week with our literature. So let's get started. Okay, so go ahead and click on the realism, naturalism slides. Okay. All right. So I'm not going to show you the video, just mostly because I think that it's good for you to watch it on your own. But I did want you to know that I have a video in here about Mark Twain that is very helpful, and it's the introduction. So, what's the Gilded Age? Okay, so realism, naturalism came around the Gilded Age, which was a coin that was turned by Mark Twain in his 1873 novel of the same name. But he kind of talked about rapid economic growth and social problems and the political corruption of materialism. And so, this is a really lovely intro to a Ken Burns Mark Twain documentary. I'm not going to share it all with you right now, but I want you to take some time to watch it sometime this week. Um, so, key literary movements of this time. So, it emerged after the Civil War, which is what we discussed last week, and it focused on depicting life and society accurately, rejected romanticism and idealization of the romantic and transcendental era. So the realistic part represents life truthfully without idealization. Naturalism depicts social conditions and heredities. Inescapable force. Regionalism focused on specific geographical areas. Mark Twain came out of this movement. And then kind of thinking about like how it contrasts the earlier romantic literature and especially like transcendentalism. So the first author we're going to be visiting this week is Mark Twain. Mark Twain is very well known as being like one of the foremost voices of American literature. His name was Samuel Clemens, but he was considered the father of American literature, at least not poetry like Walt Whitman, but rather like the story and the essay. But he brought a distinct American voice to literature. If you've ever seen Over the Garden Wall, it has a really nice episode that's very indicative of this time period, which is with the frogs on the steamboat. And it's called the Levian Frogland, and it's very heavily based on Frog of Calaveras County. So Twain's work. Okay, so Twain uses humor, irony, and exaggeration. He criticizes society this way. He employs satire a lot in his work to focus on hypocrisy and social injustice. So things to like pay attention to is like how he uses like vernacular and dialect differently than the authors before. And his satire is often very serious in its critique of American social movements. And also, like especially with Huck Finn, there is very racial language in there, but he also has the rivers all throughout his work, and just kind of thinking about like the river and how the river represents different aspects of storytelling. Okay, so some things to think about as you're reading. So Huckleberry Finn. Okay, so Huckleberry Finn, we're not going to read all of it, obviously. It's just going to be like a little tiny tidbit. But some things to think about with Huckleberry Finn is it's very, very controversial. Um, it depicts Jim in very racialized ways. It uses the N word 219 times, which is not okay. However, because of the time period in which it was written, Mark Twain was using a lot of this language in order to highlight the way that Jim was being treated by society. So, as you're reading it, go into it knowing that saying the N word as a white person is wrong. But what is the book highlighting about these issues in a time where these people were the most vulnerable, right after the Civil War? In the Notorious Jumping Frog of Calaveras County, you also have examples of tall tales, local color writing, frame narrative, dialect, and it's an early style, but it's a very distinctive style that kind of established like the American folk tale genre. But some of his influence is on like vernacular development of realistic fiction, American humor and satire, and like the actual like post Civil War landscape. But it critiqued and celebrated American culture, as opposed to the transcendentalists that just rejected American culture. Okay. So then, as you read Toni Morrison's piece, it's about Huck Finn. So it's interesting to like see Huck Finn and then read. Huck, this introduction from Toni Morrison. If you don't know who she is my favorite author of all time. But she also was a Black woman who wrote some of the most pivotal Black literature of the time. But what she talks about is she talks about the novel's ability to transform its contradiction into fruitful complexities, and to talk about it as the argument it raises, and how Huck's disproportionate sadness in his relationship with Jim is tied between like morality and social expectations. She also talks about the use of the N word and like how that racialized language is incredibly painful, but then also representative of something that was very important to recognize at the time. And so, like, thinking about that, like, think about how it challenges or enhances your understanding of the book. And moving into kind of our last couple of authors of the week, we have Edith Wharton. She's also satiric, ironic. So we have a lot of like nuances coming out with language here, ironic language, satiric language, lots of social commentary. Um, she focused on foreshadowing. She focused on moral seriousness and examining social conventions. And so as you're reading Roman Fever, like they focus on patriarchal culture, behavior and class consciousness, and then like the relationships that these women encountered, and like how there was a stigma of like women and how they behaved racially, or not racially, it's how they behaved within like their home lives and with their husbands, etc. Yeah, and so she critiques society, specifically looking at upper class, so kind of paying attention to it's just upper class, like white women. Um, and so she also, like, as you're reading, think about that irony and that social critique and generational differences. And also, think about like how Rome overlooking the Colosseum, and how there's that, as she says, like accumulated wreckage of passion and splendor. And there's a contrast there between American propriety and Roman passion. And so how does the setting like amplify those themes? Um, and then the characters, there's a contrast in the women's backgrounds, focusing on like women's interaction in patriarchal society. Okay. And also Second Story is very similar, but it does focus on the themes about like the staid first story and the feverish second story, and the hidden passion and illegitimacy that emerges in these fragments. So like keeping that in mind. All right. So we're wrapping it up here today because I know that the longer that these get, the harder it is to stay focused. So last author of the week is going to be Kate Chopin. So Kate Chopin is also emerging as a female writer out of this time, and so she talks about sensitive, daring women. And so there's a heightened awareness, empathy, and emotional depth with women, women trying to escape their position in society. Um, the the sensitivity being like almost overwhelming when they don't want to be in their social circles. And as we see in her writing, she blends like romanticism, realism, and naturalism. And so she kind of like pulls from all of these different elements in order to emphasize like there's like a nature of the individual and a rejection of society, but a portrayal within everyday life, and like how women are having to interact with their surroundings. So kind of think about like how what we saw last week, what we saw this week, and then like how Kate Chopin kind of blends them together. Um, but she kind of started some of the more modern 20th century feminist movements, exploring like women's autonomy, identity, sexuality, questioning societal norms and expectations, individual freedom and responsibility. And so thinking about like how that paved the way for like some of the more modern texts that we read. And so her writing style, differently from Wharton, is she uses a lot of irony and imagery. She uses a lot of parallel structure, and it's a very controlled narrative. In A Story of an Hour, which we're not reading this week, it's like one page, and it's very precise, and it like packs a punch with the ironic twist. And so thinking about like how she uses kind of like a little bit of a twist approach, that like a surprise ending. Um, but what you'll see with Desiree's Baby is that she uses that local color, and then she focuses on the Creoleized aspects of Louisiana, and how like the natural surroundings of nature around them are like influencing and like representing what's going on within the characters' minds. And then the last thing that I want you to think about is the psychological state of the characters. If you ever read The Awakening, the main character walks into the sea at the end of the novel. So like how these women are in situations that affect them like mentally, and how she uses like stream of consciousness and interior monologue to kind of show like that like turring and worrying of the mind and the psychological focus of the females. So as you are moving forward, some things to think about for Kate Chopin is selfhood, identity, social constructs in society, and then how she uses foreshadowing and twists in her writing. And so we've got like a lot of irony, and we've got a lot of satire, and we've got a lot of like social critique this week, which is not wholly different from last week, but it becomes a little bit more biting in this time period. So this week we're going to kind of wrap up realism and naturalism. And so when you are working your women in realism, I really want you to dig in deeply with some of those stories about Edith Wharton and Kate Chopin and Mark Twain and satire. Really think about like how he uses satire in his work to like make social commentary, and you can also address like some of the controversial issues within Huck Finn too. And then our writing workshop is it's just recreating a visual of local color with Hannibal, Missouri. So I am so excited to hear what y'all have to say about stuff this week. And I know that there are lots of different authors, but they all have different styles, and it's very interesting. And I can't wait to see the conversations that are going to come out of your work. So, thank you all so much for being amazing, and I hope you have a great week. Please email me with any questions that you have. Toodles.